I will try and make this fast, but it will be very difficult because the topic is that okay?
Yep.
Yeah.
It's an award for somebody who has done an awful lot. The Resolve Saskatchewan Award was an award established in 2015 to showcase outstanding contributions of community members and the work they do. These are often the unsung heroes in our community who've made meaningful contributions towards addressing violence. And so it's with pleasure that I present the Resolve Saskatchewan Excellence in Community Service and Research Award to Joanne Dussel. And I'm just gonna... So, again, I'll try to be brief, but it's really going to be challenging. So, and this award was actually to be presented to Joanne in 2020, but COVID happened. So it's just lovely to have the opportunity to formally present this to Joanne today. So as a result of her lifelong commitment to working to end violence against women, Joanne has had an impact on the lives of women, children, and men, both individually, and she's also facilitated change structurally. After over 20 years working with those who've experienced IPV at the Moose Jaw Transition House, in 2014, Joanne moved into the position of Executive Director of PAVS, providing support and guidance to the 23-member domestic violence shelters and agencies, along with related organizations and services in the province. In her role as Executive Director of PAVS, Joanne has made significant contributions to policy, education, and direct services, and under her leadership, PAVS has undertaken a number of innovative projects, including an arts-based cultural healing program delivered in 3 communities for Indigenous survivors of violence, training and education on the impact of IPV in the workplace, creating safer places for gender diverse people who experience violence, and other examples that include, and I don't know if I can do the whole list, successfully advocating for the implementation of a domestic violence death review in Saskatchewan, and serving on the pilot domestic violence death review and several committees and initiatives throughout the province and nationally. Been a member of the expert panel, advisory panel for Canadian Femicide Observatory for Justice and Accountability, engaged as a partner in the Canadian Domestic Homicide Prevention Initiative with vulnerable populations, and contributed as a board member for Women's Shelters Canada, including as co-chair for a period of time, contributed as a member of Gender Equality Network of Canada, sat on the Government of Canada Rural and Remote Advisory Board for the Homelessness Partnership Strategy, as well as the Regina Community Leadership Committee of Regina Homelessness Partnering Strategy. Collaborated with the Saskatchewan Ministry of Justice to address identified barriers to justice for victims of IPV. Joanne was awarded the Regina 2019 YWCA Nutrient Woman of Distinction Award for Social Justice. She worked with partners in government and policing regarding the Clare's Law Act, and now sits on the Multi-Sectoral Review Committee for Clare's Law, delivered training to business organizations across the province to make it our business, developed and delivered a training program for lawyers and mediators on understanding the dynamics of IPV, participated in the International Coalition, Every Woman Treaty, worked with community partners to create resources when they were needed and not available. For example, the 3 videos that was presented yesterday. And during the pandemic, Joanne worked tirelessly with Women's Shelters Canada, working on COVID-19 response, and has connected with past member agencies on this seemingly overwhelming challenge. So I will try and shorten this a little. Joanne works in a way, and this to me is critical and underlies all that she does. She works in a way that models how to disrupt the dynamics of violence and abuse through a genuine collaboration with folks from multiple sectors, disciplines, and lived experiences, and by consulting with and bringing the voices of survivors in all that she does. She works in partnership with organizations like Resolve, with STOPS, with SAS, the Saskatchewan SPCA, and a number of others, and the collaborative and positive relationships she's formed with government and partner agencies have resulted in real change. So members of the media regularly call Joanne to speak the issues of IPV and violence against women in our community, sometimes more than 50 interviews a year. Because of this, so many more people are aware of the issues and what they can do to respond. So Joanne demonstrates a profound commitment to advocacy and service to women who experience violence, and her work is deserving of recognition. So today, Joanne, we celebrate your contribution to creating homes and communities safe from IPV and abuse. And we hope in some small way that this award can show just how much we appreciate your efforts. Congratulations.
Again, applause is not required. When I hear that list, it just makes me tired, to tell you the truth. But I just want to thank Karen so much for all those kind words and say what a pleasure it has been working with Karen during her time at Resolve Saskatchewan, not the least working jointly so closely on the 3 Videos project. So thanks everybody, and back to your regular programming.
Such a positive note to start day 2 on. That's just lovely. But now let's get into today's content. I'd like to invite Sandy Lougheed to the stage to introduce our next speaker.
So, good morning. Oh, good morning. How can you tell I'm a teacher? Oh, what an exciting day for myself as president, national president for the Canadian Royal Purple, but also for our inaugural cause, our Purple Thursday event. First ever for us in Canada. For the Canadian Royal Purple, among all of you who are the professionals, including NECA and Glenda and all the people who are being honored here today, we are the volunteers. We are the people who live in the community with the women, with the men, with the children who experienced in their life interpersonal violence and come home. And so for us, this has been really a life-changing experience in some of our communities where the awareness of the connection between interpersonal violence and brain injury has come home to our towns in rural Saskatchewan and all across Canada. We are really thankful to the brain injury associations and to people like NECA for the research that they have done and for the insistence that we pay attention to these women and men and children when they come home. It's really been very eye-opening to us all. Actually, Purple Thursday, and the reason I'm introducing Purple Thursday is because NECA is one of the people instrumental in us having Purple Thursday. Purple Thursday came about from kind of a unique relationship. In Saskatchewan about 6 years ago, the Saskatchewan Royal Purple and the Saskatchewan Brain Injury Association formed a partnership. And our attention was brain love and brain injury awareness and prevention. And in this past year, the Canadian Royal Purple took brain injury awareness and prevention on as their national cause. And almost within a week of that decision, NECA phones to Glenda and says, "Do I have a cause for you?" And Glenda says, "Do I have people who are ready and waiting for the cause and the ability to take research, which is on paper, statistics on paper, and turn them around and bring them to the communities." Oh, I shut my phone off. I guess I did shut my phone off. I apologize. We are the Canadian Royal Purple. We are the service club. You folks are the recipients and you are the research people, and together we're going to make one whale of a team. Once the three of us partnered up, we all knew that Purple Thursday was going to happen. Today, in Saskatchewan, over 300 bags, purple bags, care bags, will be delivered to the shelters all across the province. Across Canada, from Ontario through to British Columbia, over 1,000 bags will be delivered. That's the impact of Purple Thursday. And this is only our first one. The only thing that we can guarantee you is that although it's our first, it's not our last. Now, to the business at hand. It is really, for me, a humbling experience to be asked to introduce NECA McGregor this morning. If you really want to know about NECA's big, long lists of accomplishments, you can go on Google and Google NECA McGregor. She is the co-founder and executive director of the Women's Center for Social Justice, also known as Women at the Center, and that about says it all. It's a nonprofit organization carefully created by and for survivors, women who have experienced gender-based violence. Her biography includes a very, very long list, very, very long list of honors and accomplishments. She was named one of Toronto's top women of the year in 2021. She has had positions on family law advisory committees, domestic violence advisory committees in Ontario. She is a board trustee of Girl Child, empowering and educating girls in Africa. And were I to list all of her accomplishments, she wouldn't have time to speak today, so I won't do that. Suffice is to say, if it's a women's issue, NECA will be in the forefront, ensuring justice is served. You will come to understand her expertise, and you will get to know her warmth and caring. Again, it is my honor to introduce to you NECA McGregor.
I'm mic'd. Can you hear me? Wow. First of all, thank you so much, Sandy, and thank you to all the organizers for inviting me. It looks like I'm giving somebody the finger, which is not my intent. Yes, and my name is NECA, and it is an absolute honor to be here today to be speaking to all of you. You can't hear me in the back. Okay. Is my mic on? Sandy, can you hear me? Shall I speak louder into? Oh, there we go. There we go. We've got it. Okay, hold on one second. I'm going to bring this here. Right. You're amazing. Absolutely, you're amazing. And it was funny as I was listening to your presentation, women of social justice. I completely relate. But you're absolutely amazing. My name is NECA, and I am a survivor of gender-based violence, which is why I do this work. And every time I stand in front of people, or every time I'm in a meeting, it is critical for me to speak about my gratitude for being on this land, because I am an uninvited guest on Indigenous land. I am Nigerian by ancestry and by birth. I was born in a continent that was also colonized. I was then raised in the country of the colonizer, hence the bloody accent, And then I came to Canada to raise my 3 beautiful children, who I call my 3 wishes. And every time I do this work, I remember the importance, the importance, click, technology. There we go. The importance of acknowledging the Indigenous people here. And so I'd like to start by saying that I am on, hold on one second. I am on the traditional territory, Treaty 4 of First Nations across southern Saskatchewan, including the Cree, the Saulteaux, the Dakota, the Nakota, Lakota, and the homeland of the Métis. And the reason why I want to start by acknowledging this is because the work that we do in my organization is done in solidarity with Indigenous women and girls and Two-Spirit people. And I do this work because, as I said, I can relate as a black woman who has experienced anti-black racism. I can see the impacts of anti-Indigenous racism, and part of the work and the commitment of my organization is that we stand not as allies, but as accomplices. And I use that word very, very advisedly, because if white supremacy and anti-Indigenous racism and anti-black racism says that we and our bodies and the way we exist are somehow less than, then it is incumbent on other people to stand as accomplices and stand there in the front lines beside and between. And a lot of our work is really calling people to be accountable for the atrocities and the genocide that's being committed here. And so I want to say with profound gratitude to all the Indigenous people that are in this room and outside that I am standing here in solidarity with, for, by you in all things. So call me anytime you need somebody to be on the front lines with you, because that is part of my commitment. So I want to talk about what we're going to be talking about, and it's strangulation. Just a quick warning, this is a very, very traumatizing, triggering is the word a lot of people use. It's a very triggering conversation. And so I'm asking all of you today, as we go through the slides, if at any time you feel a little bit wobbly, for want of a better word, you feel that you need to take time to catch your breath, grab a glass of water or Chardonnay. It's a bit too early in the morning for that, but you never know. I'm not here to judge. Whatever you need to do to keep yourself grounded as we go through these slides, please feel free to do so. So, this is going to be really difficult operating two slides. Let's try. So the working definition, some people call it domestic violence, some people call it intimate partner violence, some people call it spousal violence. Whatever it is, we're talking about a particular form of violence that is most often targeting women and girls and Two-Spirit, gender diverse individuals. It does happen to men, acknowledge that. Women can be abusive to their male partners. It also happens in 2S LGBTQ relationships, but the reason why this is a gendered conversation and the reason why we call it gender-based violence is because oftentimes the targeted group are mostly women, and the perpetrators of the violence are mostly men. And when you compare the types of injuries that are caused to the mostly women who are the recipients versus men who are abused, you'll find that the nature and the extent of the injuries that women receive are oftentimes far, far greater. So it's a gendered conversation. I'm going to go through very, very quickly and share some very fast facts. Some of the data is a bit dated. It's a little bit out of date, but anyway. $7.4 billion is the estimated cost of spousal violence in Canada, and this was from, I think, 2011. $7.4 billion, taxpayers' dollars, is what we are all paying towards the impacts of gender-based violence in the Canadian context. 50% of all women in Canada will have experienced at least one incident of physical or sexual violence in their lifetime. 50%. So if you look at this room, I can tell you that I am not the only one who is a survivor of intimate partner violence, just based on those stats alone. 67% of all Canadians say that they know somebody personally who has experienced gender-based violence. And I'm giving you all these stats so that you can understand how prevalent and how pervasive this is across Canada, across socioeconomic status. 1.2 million women in Canada reported being victims of spousal violence, right? Those are the ones who actually call up the police and file a report, 1.2 million. And we know that is a gross underrepresentation of women who are actually experiencing it. I have another talk where I talk about why women don't report. I'm not going to go into it here, but there's a plethora of reasons why women don't call the police, and especially if you are black or if you are Indigenous, because we understand that the criminal legal system is inherently embedded with anti-black and anti-Indigenous racism. So black women and Indigenous women do not feel safe going to report to these criminal legal system. Then 40% of violent crimes in Canada reported was committed against a woman by a former or current partner. 40%, almost half of women who have been assaulted, it's not the stranger. It is somebody that is very, very well known to them. And then finally, 49% of all solved homicides of women were killed by their intimate partners. And I know this work. Joanne, you do Domestic Violence Death Review Committee work. I also sit on the Domestic Violence Committee in Ontario. We know this, that women are mostly killed by somebody who is very well known to them, mostly killed by somebody who is supposed to be the loving counterpart, right? So home is not a safe place for women. What's the issue? Violence against women, particularly intimate partner violence, is a major public health issue. And this is something that the World Health Organization has reported, and especially in the last 2 years with COVID, the incidence of intimate partner violence has skyrocketed because women were all told to stay at home. You're staying at home with your abuser, and the violence and the stress and the tensions escalate, and so women experienced far more. I'm going to go through all of this. The WHO estimated that 1 in 3 women worldwide across this planet, 1 in 3 women will either have experienced physical or sexual violence in their lifetime. And as we know, there are indicators that we have that can tell us what are the risk factors. What is it that predisposes somebody to be a victim of violence? And what are the risk factors that we know are there that are pre-indicators of femicide, killings of women? So, which is what we're going to be doing, is looking at a fellow by the name of Brian Vallée, who passed away. I don't know if anybody knew him. Amazing journalist. Wrote a book called The War on Women. And I share this because this is a really interesting analysis. What he did was he collected data in the US and in Canada between 2000 and 2006. And he was comparing soldiers and law enforcement officers and paramedics and ambulance personnel in both Canada and in the US. And he documented that between 2000 and 2006, there were 2,667 soldiers who were killed in war, right? And that included the Iraqi war, the Afghan war, etc. In Canada, between the same period, there were 44 soldiers killed during the same period. You look at police, law enforcement, 611 were what they called feloniously killed, right? So in the course of their duties as police officers. And in Canada, there were 16 in the line of duty, and then there were others sort of non-hostile, car crashes, etc., etc. So looking at that, just to wrap it up, total combined in the US, 4,588 soldiers, police officers, etc. In Canada, there was 101. Remember these numbers. Because Brian then went on to look at the numbers of women and girls who were killed in the same period in the US and in Canada. And he found that in the United States, between the same time, there was over 8,000 women. And in the same period in Canada, he found about 500. And I put the brackets about the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls because we still don't know how many there are. But in his research, in the same period, 8,000 women who were in a relationship where you're thinking it's going to be about love and kindness and compassion, who end up being murdered, who didn't enter into the relationship as soldiers do, knowing that there is a risk of death. But there are twice as many women in that same period who lost their lives in the US, and in Canada, 5 times the amount of women in the same period. Stop and think about that for a second. This is why when we talk about femicide, when we talk about it as a pandemic, when we talk about it as a health crisis, this is the reason why. But people don't have data. You don't have the statistics. And oftentimes, you're not in spaces like this where you can compare, right? Looking at police officers, looking at soldiers, etc. So, why is it femicide? Why do we know that it's a gendered issue? Joanna and I sit on Myrna Dawson's Canadian Femicide Observatory. This is the report from 2021. And in your province, you can't see it, but it was about, I think there were 7 women in 2021 who were killed in this province alone. Right? 173 women and girls killed in Canada just because they were in a relationship with somebody. And oftentimes, and what I've found, again, in the work that I do on the Domestic Violence Death Review Committee, is that 90% of the perpetrators of these killings are men. So when people say it isn't gendered, this is the statistics that we use to tell you it bloody well is gendered. Because it's men who are doing the killing. The targets of the killing are women and girls and gender diverse individuals. And it is not the other way round. It is not women killing men in such high numbers. That's why this is a gendered issue. So, there's something I call taken incremental liberties. I'm going to list all this stuff. We did a research, Court Watch. We're very well known for our court watches, where Women at the Centre goes and we sit in the specialised domestic violence courts in Ontario to monitor what's happening in these courts, where she actually reports, or somebody reports, he's arrested, and there's a trial. So what actually happens at the trial? This is what a court watch is. And the findings that we have, women won't report. They won't report for a bunch of reasons, but primarily because when they do report, they're not believed. If they are believed, the charges that are laid are oftentimes not as serious as the actual assault that she sustained. And then there's a whole bunch of reasons where even if he is convicted, what the Crowns judges tend to award are peace bonds, which is behave yourself. Stay 500 yards away from her. Don't carry a gun. No, all of that stuff doesn't stop somebody who is intent on killing to say to him, behave yourself. That isn't an intervention that is effective at all. So taking it seriously, this is where we get into I call it beans and broccoli. I was vegan for 7 years. Up until May of this year, I went to Italy and smelt salmon, and then and it was over. It was over. But anyway, I used to call, instead of meat and potatoes, I call it beans and broccoli. So here are the beans and broccoli. Non-fatal strangulation is an important risk factor in the femicide of women, right? And that was from research from a brilliant research called Nancy Glass and Jacqueline Campbell, Dr. Jacqueline Campbell. But in the Canadian context, so there's a lot of information in the States, a lot of information. They even have something called the Strangulation Institute, which is led by a lovely fellow who is a bit of a crush of mine. His name is Casey Gwynn and Gail Strack. They founded the Strangulation Institute. They do a lot of incredible work. And then you look at Canada and you wonder, what are we doing over here? Well, I can tell you diddly squat. Very, 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 very little. So despite the seriousness and pervasiveness of strangulation in the Canadian context, little attention is paid to this issue. Some more stats. 13% of women killed by their partners in Ontario over the past decade were strangled, smothered, or choked. And we're going to talk about why we don't call it choking in a minute. 19% of women who reported violence by a partner between 1999 and 2004 also report being strangled. And then there's some stats around, the most important part is that in 2019, there was a change. Again, we were doing a lot of advocacy around this. There was a change to the Canadian Criminal Code, and it now has increased the severity of strangulation. Before, it was just a common assault. But now, because of a lot of work and advocacy that's been happening, strangulation is being deemed as a more serious offence, and you can get up to 10 years. I have another presentation, which you're going to hear more of this. I keep saying this. I have another presentation where I talk about the ineffectiveness of the criminal legal system, because I don't think that the criminal legal system as it stands is a way to bring about transformation. We actually work on transformative justice, restorative justice as a way to bring healing into the community. But anyway, so strangulation defined as external pressure. I'm actually going to give you some information on, this is important. Women survivors of non-fatal strangulation are 600% more likely to become victims of a femicide, and more than 700% more likely to become actual victims of the murder. So if you've been strangled once, twice, and oftentimes women are not only experiencing strangulation once, it's multiple times, but it is a serious indicator that you are likely to be killed by your partner. So taking strangulation seriously is one of the critical take-home messages that we deliver every time we do this work. But I wanted to share with you how quickly it is. Okay, it's different types of strangulation, we all know that, but the physics of it. So the degree of pressure, the degree of force that you apply, right, with the length of time that you apply the pressure for, the surface area, how wide the space is that you're putting the pressure on, the individual's anatomy, so it could, if they're a child, it's different from if they're an adult, right? And then can lead to a loss of consciousness in 10 seconds. So applying pressure on a part of the body, a part of the neck, for something like 10 seconds, you can lose consciousness, you black out, right? So how much pressure are we talking about? 4 pounds of pressure. That's all it takes to block the blood flow to the jugular veins. 11 pounds of pressure is the amount it takes to stop flow to the carotid arteries. 33 pounds of pressure is what it takes to block your trachea, your windpipe. And then you compare this. All of this doesn't make sense, right? We're just seeing numbers. But what does it actually mean in relation to practical stuff? So how much pressure does it take to open a can of Coke? You've all done it, right? Pepsi, depending on your poison. When you click, you know the motion you click that, right? You know what I'm talking about? Everyone's looking at me blankly. Thank you. Thank you. This thing, when you open the can of Coke or Pepsi, the tab, thank you, darling. The amount of pressure it takes to open the tab is only 20 pounds. So remember, that's not hard. That's not a lot of pressure that you're exerting. And then the average handshake, which I did a couple of this morning, the average handshake is between 80 and 100 pounds. So how much pressure does it actually take to get somebody to lose consciousness and pass out? It's not a lot. That's why I like this slide, because it relates, it makes it more relatable so that you can understand that it is a very, very easy and simple thing to do, which is why it's a very, very common form. It's not a weapon, the hand does become a weapon, but it's a very common form of assault. So what happens? You are interrupting the blood flow to the brain. What results is shortness of breath, severe neck pain, panic, fear, seeing stars, blacking out, loss of consciousness, as I said. And then there's this part, involuntary loss of bowel movement or your urine. This is very, very, very serious, because when that happens in somebody who is being strangled, it means that they are seconds away from death. But people, again, don't understand that loss of consciousness and then loss of bowel or bladder movements is, she's on death's door, literally, right? And then brain death can happen, and then there's death. So I want us to actually get into the beans and broccoli of the research. Signs of strangulation, this is important. 60% had no visible signs. So people think that when you're strangled, there are fingerprint marks, bruises on the neck. Most women don't have signs of bruising on the neck. Most women. Black women, you don't see signs of bruising often on black women's skin around strangulation. And so when you go and report, if you do go and report, and you say that you were strangled, people look at you, right? They do, medical practitioners, police officers, they look at the neck, they don't see bruises, and what does that do? They don't believe you. But the reality is that most instances of strangulation, there are no physical marks on the exterior, on the surface of the skin. 33% of cases, you couldn't see an injury that was enough to show up on a photograph. In 33% of the cases. 22% of the cases, it was so minor, the types of injuries that you could actually capture. But none of that negates the fact of the strangulation, right? And signs of strangulation. The most common signs is what's known as petechial hemorrhage, which is the blood vessels pop. So you can either see it popped in your eyes, in the roof of the mouth. If you open the mouth, when you're doing the examination, you can see it. And you can also see blood vessels pop on the scalp if they did that type of examination. So you can see it, eyes, face, inside the mouth and behind the ears. What do you need to know? What do we do? So our participatory research in 2014, I'm listing all the wonderful people who did it with us. Sorry, hold on one second. All the wonderful people who did it with us received $15,000 from Women's College Hospital. It wasn't a lot of money, but this is still the only Canadian context research that we have. This is done in 2014. It's the only ethics-approved research that exists in the Canadian context, documenting the experiences of women survivors of interpersonal, intimate partner violence, which is what we're going to talk about in a minute. I'm not going to play the video. This is who we conducted the research on. Adult women survivors of intimate partner violence, English-speaking individuals. They were, we called it conversation. It was research in the academic technical term, but because it was done by our organization, we didn't want to appear, to be inaccessible. So it was more conversational with a survivor, one survivor, usually myself, and another researcher who interviewed the women. And it was between an hour and a half in our lovely offices on King Street in Toronto. And one of the critical things we do also is that we provide honoraria for women. And to me, that is a no-brainer. No pun intended. I just realized that. That is a no-brainer. Because when you're asking survivors to engage in this type of work and you offer them $25, I think that's a bloody insult. But that's what a lot of researchers do. So for us, we said we wanted to give like $100. The ethics committee, I'm digressing, but this is important. The ethics committee came back and said to us, oh my goodness, that's a lot of money. That's a lot. And I'm thinking, that's a lot that you're asking of somebody. Anyway, we provided honoraria, childcare, and refreshments. Here's the executive summary. You can find it on our website. Total of 15 women, but we only used data from 14 because one of the women actually was talking about a strangulation that she experienced back in her country in Africa that was committed by police, so we couldn't use that data. But the other 14 was the data that we relied on. So here are the key findings. Language matters. This is important, people. If you walk away from today with nothing else apart from beans and broccoli, this is the other thing. Choke in is not the word, right? When you choke, it is on a piece of, it's an object that gets lodged in your throat. That's what choking is, right? It's usually accidental. You don't choke yourself on purpose. And it's usually, as I said, a foreign object that's in there. Strangle, which is the technical and the legal term which you will all be using from today henceforth. Strangle is, as I said, that application of pressure and force around the neck, right? And it's deliberate and it's intentional. And in the IPV, in the intimate partner interpersonal violence context, it is a deliberate act. It is a deliberate act that is done to show power and control over somebody. And it's literally that I have your life in my hands is the message that the perpetrator is sending. So in her own words, these are the words of the women that we interviewed. And the number at the bottom, the number at the bottom is the participant number. So participant number 3 said, he had grabbed me around my throat and started choking. So women use that word because it's colloquial, right? It's interchangeable, but we're telling everybody don't call it strangle. So participant number 3 choked me. Participant number 5, I just remember my toes on the ground and he's choking me. Participant number 6, but when he starts the choking, he's just shaking you. So we're realizing that it's not just being strangled. There are other assaults. There are other physical acts that are the person, the victim, the woman is experiencing at the same time. And you're going to hear quotes about heads being banged on the floor, heads being banged on ellipticals, as well as shaking. Strangulation is part of a woman's history of intimate partner violence, and it affects others. And so who were the others who were impacted? 50% of the women that we interviewed stated that their children witnessed. So their children were in the room when that assault, when the mother was being strangled. So participant number 3 said, I had one daughter in my arms. My baby was in my arms. So stop for a second again and think. He is strangling her while she is holding their child. Right? Participant, this one always chokes me up, pun intended. I screamed to my children. My son came. He saw how the father was. I was screaming, don't stay here. If I don't wake up tomorrow, you can tell your grandma how I died. Her son was 6. Strangulation also affects others. It affects pets. People don't think about this, right? 21% of the women we interviewed also explained that there'd been previous physical abuse towards their pets, 14% saying that their pet was actually in the room. So, my dog was with me. I find that important because he's never been the same. And she was talking about how her dog, after that incident that happened 5 years before this interview, her dog started, every time a man came, every time he saw a man, the dog will start just barking ferociously. So that one incident that the dog witnessed changed the dog's behavior. Anything can set him off. So the women's perceptions of what were the precipitating factors leading up to the strangulation, it varied. 50% said it was not doing what the partner wanted her to do. So it was seen as an act of disobedience. So because she didn't do as she was told, he then proceeded to strangle her. So half of the women, that was what precipitated it. And then for 33%, separation. And again, something that you should know, separation is one of the leading indicators of femicide. When a woman leaves, most likely she's going to be killed within 12 months of leaving. So, third thing to walk away with, and Glenda and I were talking about this yesterday, please stop asking women, why don't you leave? Please stop asking. And if you hear anybody say to a woman, why don't you leave? Say to them, Neka said, and then go into this list. First of all, don't ask her, why doesn't she leave? Ask him, why is he abusing? Because she is not responsible for his actions. Secondly, why doesn't she leave? Because access to affordable housing is impossible in this country. So women feel that they have nowhere to go. And I ask any of you to wake up at 3 in the morning, pack a bag, or as much as you can, you've got 5 minutes before he wakes up, and try and get out with 3 kids. Just like that. How many of you have a plan? And you have family, and you have, another house that you can go and sit in where he won't find. It's an impossible ask. So stop asking women, why don't you leave? Because that is a very, very dangerous time, and women are most often killed 12 months of separation. 86% of women could identify an event that triggered the strangulation, so they knew, in her own words, an act of defiance. This is fascinating. An act of defiance. For one woman was, she didn't want to have sex with him 24 hours after giving birth. She gave birth yesterday, came home, he wanted sex. She said, no, I can't. That was the precipitating factor. He wanted sex, and I said no. That was it. That led to the violence. For another woman, her ex-partner became enraged where she didn't want to get out of bed quickly to get the baby. So the baby's sleeping in another room. The baby starts crying. He's been home all day. She's been looking after the kid. She's exhausted. She's exhausted. The baby starts crying. He's kicking her in the bed and telling her to go get the baby. And she says, for God's sake, I'm tired. That was all it took. Yeah, the baby woke up, interrupted his sleep. In her words. Now, this is interesting. Now, I know it could have been, I know it wouldn't matter. It could have been burnt macaroni and cheese. And I saw later that it could have been anything. It didn't have to be that. He could have just been in the mood, and when the mood struck him, the mood struck him, and he struck me. So there was no excuse, really. You didn't need the baby waking up. You didn't need, I wanted to. It could be just because he was in the mood. Our findings, it's personal. Our findings support the work of Gail Strack in San Diego that said that it's the most common form of intimate partner assault. Right? Nope, my thing's right. I'm going to actually find this slide, so bear with me 2 seconds. There you go. Oh, it's not. Yeah, two hands. There's no space. Every space in your neck is covered. It was a shock because all of a sudden you see hands of someone around your neck. It's just an experience that you don't expect because it's where the air is coming from. And this, I remember this interview, the look on her face as she was saying, it was like, it was unfathomable that somebody would, why would you want to cut off my air supply? She sat there with her hand on her head thinking, I still don't understand it. So he always did two hands. Is that the right one? Yes, he always did two hands, and he'd always lift my head and then bang it, lift my head and bang it, and then just keep choking, like putting pressure on. And it was like this look in his eyes, oh my God, I'll never forget it. And that to us was about how manual strangulation being the most common form, and they strangle from the front. So they're strangling her so that she can look at him and she can see him. And it was again about power, ultimate power, that I can take your life anytime that I want. So manual strangulation from the front was the most common form. How am I on time?
You're good.
Are you sure? I actually had 86 slides, which I cut down for you because I was told I had an hour. Where was it? Where did it happen? For all the women we interviewed, it happened at home. So the home, which is supposed to be the safest place, this is where she is being assaulted. And so 33% cited their bedroom, 29% cited the family room, 14% cited the children's bedroom. This is tragic. Hold on. I'm going to go to the next one very quickly. I'm so sorry. Hold on. Yes, ma'am. Are you sure?
25 minutes.
Oh, let's relax and start again. That's good. That's good to know. I was rushing like a fiend. So it's not a one-time occurrence. Were you strangled on more than one occasion? Let me just find that slide. For 86% of the women, yes, on multiple occasions. How many times they were asked? I'm just going to list them all. 21% said twice. 14% said many times, multiple times. And 14% said 15 times or more. So for one woman, participant number 10, she said maybe 6 times. And then participant number 11, oops, the daisy. Participant number 11 said maybe 20 times, maybe more. And again, I'm stressing that because we know that the impacts of strangulation, it's exponential. So you get strangled once, you get strangled twice, it's not twice as bad the second time. It's like 5 times as bad the second time. You get strangled the third time, it's now 30 times as bad the third time. So the more you're strangled, the more negative, deleterious impact it has on her health. So these women, and this is important to note now, these women that we were interviewing, none of them had ever really thought about the health impacts that they were suffering and having it relate back to these episodes of strangulation. So we have women today, 2022, October the 20th, 2022, there are women walking around in your province, across coast to coast to coast in Canada, globally, who are victims of strangulation, but they don't know why they are suffering the health impacts that they're suffering. So this is why the work is really important about awareness raising. So about how often. One survivor said, I can't count because it happened often. So I have more collection than I want. Many times he would say, I will kill you. And then once he saw that, well, she's dying, then he'd stop. So again, he threatens, he follows through, she loses consciousness, and then he backs away. So when we talk about it being the ultimate form of control, they get off on it. The perpetrators actually enjoy and get off on it. She passes out and he thinks, yeah, she'll learn. But again, we found it's not, you don't have to do anything to elicit the violence. What else did we learn? So, we asked women, can you recall the manner in which you were strangled? 64% said both hands. 43% said he started with one. No, 64% said both hands, and then 43% said one hand. And then in her own words, both hands. Yeah, it was always both hands. Yeah, he had his knee. He'd have his knees on my chest, and then both hands. So she's on the ground. He's kneeling on her, and then strangling. Right? Are you all okay? You sure? Tea? Good. Passage of time. We asked them, do you remember approximately how long that particular strangulation episode was for? And in her own words, participant number 3 said, I can't remember that because it didn't take that long for me to get knocked out. I mean, the pressure, I am so sorry. I have to keep doing that. I'm so sorry. The pressure that he had on me when he would see that, you could see the thumbprint, he would have knocked me out almost immediately. That was participant number 3. Participant number 5 said, no, my goodness, it seemed like an eternity, but it's hard because it's like in slow motion, but it's all happening really quick. Participant number 10 said, not sure because I passed out right after, but I couldn't have been that long. And then every time he would strangle me, he would feel like my face was turning red or I didn't have any breath left. And he'd let go in time, but just in time. And then participant number 15 said, seemed like forever. I don't really remember because I black out. Then we asked the women, did your partner say anything to you whilst he was strangling you? 79% said yes. Participant number 1 said, he was saying, you're going to die. You're going to die tonight. I'm going to kill you. Participant number 8 said, he had said, I want you to not breathe anymore. Think about that. That's such a conversational thing. I want you to not breathe anymore. And then he's going to kill me and kill himself and then come after my kids. Yeah, pretty much everything. The best insults of them all was, he called me a coward. And I was saying this This was one of those break-in moments when you realize that you are above all of this now, kinda. So he's strangling her and calling her a coward. And then as we were talking, as we were doing the interview, she said, well, that's when she realizes, you know what? I'm above all of this. But the kinda is, I'm actually kinda not. And then participant number 10 said, more asking, why did I start this whole fight with him? If I kept calm and didn't yell, then this wouldn't have happened. So it's about redirecting blame on the victim. So it's your fault that I'm strangling you. You made me do this. And then we asked women, what are the most prominent thoughts that you had at the time? What was going through your mind? For 79% of the women, they were all convinced that they were going to die. They all thought that that was the final day for them. And 29% of the women, they were afraid for their children. So participant number 1 said, I was afraid, petrified that I was going to die. What was at the forefront, what was constantly in my mind with my kids, because they were there, they were seeing it, they were hearing it. What was going on in my mind was that it was Mother's Day, and I was deathly afraid that I was going to die on Mother's Day. And then we asked women, what were the most prominent thoughts again? And participant number 12 said, there we go, I was worried that if he killed me, he would hurt them, referring to the children, next. Or if they would find me dead, and I was worried about their well-being. On the flip side, when he finally let go, I was thinking, thank God I'm still alive. I didn't think he was going to let go. Participant number 14 said, yeah, it was like, I was thinking like, okay, this is too much, and my kids are witnessing too much. And the baby was there, and she was only a year old, and she was devastated, right? Then we asked women, oops, a daisy, what made him stop? What made him stop strangling you? For 36% of the participants, they lost consciousness, so they blacked out. Participant number 3 said, the fact that he had me under control, knocked out, because he beat me after he had knocked me out. So he just stopped when he was done. And I think he probably hoped that I was dead because he just left me there. Participant number 10 said, the fact that I passed out and maybe he thought, oh no, I killed her. Because when I woke up, he was like, I'm so sorry. And I said that in a smarmy voice because that's the only way. How do you apologize? Then we had what made him stop. So 14%, it was the children. Sorry, this is silly. There we go, I'm just going to leave it there. 14% it was the children. 14% used self-defense. She actually kneed him in the groin. For 14%, she threatened to call the police. 7%, somebody else, a third party came and intervened. For somebody else, another participant, she apologized to him, right? And then for 7%, he stopped because he was tired. Participant number 7, oh, sorry, hold on. There it is. She said, I kicked him in the junk. Participant number 12 said, he knew he had total control and power over me, and he knew that I knew that, and that's what he wanted. So he achieved his goal, and he got off on it, and then it was good, and he was fulfilled in his own self. And I never really looked at it that way, from that perspective, why he stopped. I assume that's why he stopped. And then, strangulation leads to loss of consciousness. I keep emphasizing this because, again, you don't need a lot of pressure for her to black out. 64% of the participants that we interviewed blacked out. And then, participant number 3 said, I can't tell you what happened because I can't remember. All I remember is waking up. I know that when I came to, I was on the floor in the bedroom. He grabbed me around my throat and started choking, and that's when I passed out. So I have no idea how the baby got into the bed or anything like that. I just know that when I came to, I could hardly move and I couldn't figure out what was wrong. Participant number 14, I don't know. I just kind of remember waking up beside my daughter's bed and she'd put a blanket over me. The baby who put the blanket was 1.5 years and thought that her mum was sleeping. So, what's this got to do with traumatic brain injury? Right? Beans and broccoli. So, during the strangulation episode, 57% of women also experienced some form of head trauma. Either from 43% from being shaken, having their head pounded on the floor or against an elliptical. And we know, the research has shown that when there is physical violence, the most common parts of the body that the perpetrator attacks are where? The head, face, and neck. And it includes strangulation. So we know that this is a common form of violence. And then participant number 6 said, he was banging my head on the wall. Something was cut, and I think it was my mouth. I lost blood, and that blood has stained the wall, and I tried all my life to wash it off, and it just never left. Many women also described other signs of brain injury. I'm going to list them all. So 21% actually used the word concussion. They talked about, I had a concussion. 85% talked about feeling lightheaded. 71% of the women had headaches, and not like a Tylenol go-away headaches that you take after a couple of hours. These are persistent headaches that have lasted 5, 7, 10 years after these strangulation episodes. So it's a persistent, recurring headache that they're living with. Loss of memory, long short-term memory has been impacted by the strangulation. Their vision has been impaired, and then suffering from general confusion. So for participant number 11 said, I have a hard time spelling words. I used to be the top student in spelling bee, she said, and everything. Now I can't remember how to spell words. Participant number 13 said, they tell you, you have a concussion. They say you need to take full cognitive test. They say, so take time off for a full week. So they say, so for like a full week, so for a couple of weeks, I was pretty out of it, probably for a few months. It was probably a few months, yeah. A really difficult time regaining my focus and keeping focus, because particularly for work. So this woman worked for the government and would talk about how she'd come into work and would not remember what she was doing, right? What task she was performing. And because she didn't disclose to anybody at work, it was then being seen as she was slacking, right? She was slacking off and not pulling her weight at work. Other physical symptoms, going to list them all. Other physical symptoms of the strangulation, changes to your voice. Their voices become raspy and hoarse. They have sore throat, difficulty breathing, difficulty swallowing. They have pain when they swallow. They have neck pains, weakness in their limbs, their arms and legs. They have neck swellings, coughing, nausea and vomiting, loss of urine and bowel. And as I said earlier on, when you're at the point where you're losing control of your bowels and your urinary tract, you are on the cusp of death. And we had 7% of the women who actually lost consciousness. And then about visible marks. Participant number 3 said, I could feel my chest was very sore. And I looked into a mirror and you could literally see, I still have pictures because I went to the doctor the very next day, and you see his whole hand, his perfect thumb and 4 fingers where he squeezed my throat until I passed out, and then beat me about my chest with his feet. Participant number 11 said, I couldn't even go out because I had like handprints. I had 2 handprints on my neck, and you don't want anyone to see that. And it was summer, so I couldn't wear a big ass turtleneck or scarf. Then people would know it's like wearing sunglasses to cover a black eye in winter. We asked other emotional impacts of strangulation. Just going to list them all. Anger. Women were feeling anger, interestingly, not at the time of the strangulation, because you're in survival mode. It was afterwards, right? Anger would sort of swell, and the anger was not necessarily directed at the perpetrator, the partner. It was they became angry, and again, Lynn Haag, and our colleagues at University of Toronto have done work around how strangulation precipitates a change in behavior. Women get aggressive, but again, not to the aggressive extent that they start beating up their partners. Anyway, anger is one. 86% of survivors identify that. Flashbacks, 86%. Sense of helplessness. It impacted, seriously adversely impacted their sleep patterns. So they couldn't sleep. And when they did fall asleep, they couldn't stay asleep for long periods. And so, as we know, sleep deprivation is a form of torture. So that, again, added to their trauma they were experiencing. And then 71% also described suffering the effects of depression. Participant number 1 said, my anger still has not quite subsided because it was like rage. It was like skin. I grew a new skin of anger. I love that quote. I must say so myself. And so what did we do? Sort of the purpose of the work, every research that my organization gets involved with is, as you know, centered around survivors. And we know that researchers tend to ask survivors, right, as participants. But oftentimes, that type of research, the researcher is the beneficiary. So they get to publish, and I applaud them, they get to publish their stuff and their names, and they get in wonderful journals. Our work, we flip it. The primary beneficiary of any research that we do has to be survivors. And so for us, survivors need to be the beneficiaries of everything that we do. And survivors are the beneficiaries of this particular research. There's a need to inform survivors about the gravity, the seriousness of strangulation, because I can tell you, none of the women that we spoke to, none of them realized just how life-threatening and how close they were to death and how much of a risk to femicide that they were in because of these episodes of strangulation. So it is critical for us, it has been critical, that we inform survivors across the world about the harms and the dangers of strangulation and its seriousness. And it's also important that survivors know that they're not alone. They are not alone going through this because, again, they don't discuss it because of shame and blame. So again, part of our work is to, get rid of all of that shame and blame and let them know that they are not alone. It's also important for healthcare community. They also need to know the gravity. We talk about the gender-based violence sector who deal with violence against women and girls and gender diverse people all the time, but they didn't know much about strangulation. Neither do they know even little about traumatic brain injury. Right? So part of our work is about awareness raising and education. Healthcare survivors and the community need to know and how to ask questions around strangulation and do it in a way that is empathetic and non-judgmental and that will elicit some type of positive response. And part of that is also about having resources. We'll talk about that afterwards. Actually, it is there. Resources and referrals and doing proper support. So what we did is that we came up with something called the 4 C's of strangulation. The first one is context. The first C is context. So that is around understanding the social context of strangulation, including the power and control dynamics that really motivates the abuser under those circumstances. That's C number 1. The second C is consequences. So understanding what are the impacts, what actually happens to the victim of the strangulation. The third one is communication, which is how do you support, right? What are the best ways that you can ask the questions, I said, so that she can disclose? And also, what are the best ways for you, people working in the sector, to be sharing information with each other so that, again, it's like the each one reach one, which I actually have a slide coming up on. And then the last C is about care, finding out about resources in your community where the survivor can go. I'm doing another conference in Chicago on the 9th of November, and it's about the ethical and legal considerations of screening, right? Because to me, and again, I was talking to Glenda yesterday, screening is, you're asking a series of questions, and if you're asking her about strangulation as an example, but you have nothing to give her, no resources to refer her to, no support services, no one to call, you have to ask yourself, well, what is the purpose of those series of questions? So before you engage in screening, look around and find resources that are accessible. So those are the 4 C's. Digression, but on point. We have done research subsequently on alternative models of justice for sexual violence survivors, and we've expanded the 4 C's into 6, and I'll talk about that. You can look it up on our website, because I've just been told I've got 5 minutes. And then the each one reach one, which I think is the cutest thing. Hold on, the cutest thing is the squirrel. There we go. Each one reach one. And it's thinking about ways everybody has a responsibility, right, to share information, to provide support, and understand that you know somebody. Not because you are here because of the work that you're doing, but in your life. Your kid's teacher, right? You know somebody who has experienced intimate partner-based strangulation. So being informed is critical for you to then go out and share. And remember the 4 C's, create safety, etc., etc., etc. I want to talk very quickly. We just received funding. That's not it. I'm going to go back. Come on, Neka. Sorry. We just received... What am I looking at that I can't see? I see it on my screen, but it's not. We just received funding from Public Health Agency of Canada in April, $1.3 million to, it's called Cross-Sectorial Solutions, Strengthening Community Capacity to Address the Parallel Pandemic of Intimate Partner Violence Related Brain Injury through Survivor-Led Interventions. And we're doing this work with 3 amazing Girl Crush organizations. One Girl Crush person is Dr. Angela Colantonio, who is the research lead at University of Toronto's Acquired Brain Injury Lab, and Helena Hag. And then also with folks at CRIDGE, the CRIDGE Center for the Family, BIST, which is the Brain Injury Society of Toronto, and the Barrow Institute in the States, where we're developing resources. So when I say go find resources, we are developing the resources that you can now go and find. And I'm going to go very quickly to my last slide, which tells you that NECA needs a life, because usually this thing flies in, right? And the birds flap and do their stuff. So I want to thank you all for taking the time and listening to me. Oh, did it go? Oh, it went. There we go. I'll do it one more time. There we go. There we go.